I'm recording my homily for the Christmas Day Masses, and as you know, just a little while ago I recorded my homily for the fourth Sunday of Advent, and in that message there was simply this message that there is something that faith does. It transforms us, right? So faith is transformative, whereas other parts of our culture have tried to attack that, but we hold to it because it's something beautiful. Now, as we enter into Christmas, we begin to see this transformation happening. Now, the essential message that I had for today, for Christmas Day Masses, was simply how we cannot give until we have first received. So if it's transformative, we first have to receive that transformation so that we can then give it. So when I was talking with the kids, this banner here is in the back of our church, and so it has the nativity scene on it. But I was talking to the kids during one of the masses about the different characters, the different people in this moment. And so obviously the kids, they know Joseph and Mary and obviously Jesus and the angel, right? The angel Gabriel and the shepherds. And so we kind of went through, but I wanted the kids really to get just this idea that until we have received, we cannot give. And so Jesus here is in this moment where he's simply receiving. Jesus is receiving lots of love, lots of protection, safety, right? And even though, yes, he's giving us a model of a king who's so humble that he would be born in a stable, that he would come from humble origins, that the very first people he would invite in to receive him, right? So they need to receive first, are shepherds. And shepherds would have been very, very poor. They would have been the average blue-collar worker, if you will. Nothing spectacular about them, but yet they were the first to receive the message and to come to him. And so you have all these examples, though, of Jesus receiving before, in the end, really he's giving. So the angel is giving the message. People are going to bring gifts to Jesus. Right now, Jesus' job is simply to receive. And he's setting a model for us. He's setting an example for us. Because there's going to be a day, and I know this is one of my few videos that I don't have a cross behind me, but there's going to be a day when Jesus is going to give it all. But first, the model is to receive. And how does he receive? That's how he receives, very humbly, very innocently, okay? So I want to go into that a little bit. In my fourth Sunday of Advent homily, I talked about an article I was reading in the magazine First Things. Well, there was another article I was reading that I want to talk about. And so in this article, the author talks about Christianity as it was during the Roman Empire. So this is during the time of Peter and Paul. So Peter and Paul, Saints Peter and Paul, they both go to Rome. They're both martyred there. And then you have the subsequent popes for the next couple hundred years who are all martyred, right? It's to be elected pope back then was basically to be executed or to be put on death row. But everybody was so transformed, they were so excited about the faith that that didn't deter them at all. They wanted to share the faith. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit just into the article. So he talks about the Roman culture at the time. Now, we often think of the Roman culture as just being really decadent, as being sinful, as being immoral, and you could almost think of it as being lawless. Just people manipulating people, just everybody getting what they want. And he says that that's really not an accurate portrayal of the Roman Empire. That there were clear guidelines, there were clear rules of behavior as part of their culture. And so one of the examples he gives is that for men, it was simply expected that men were unfaithful to their wives. They were unfaithful to their families. So yes, they would be married, they would have kids, and they would support them financially and all those things. But they were not expected to be faithful in the marital sense. And so men, even after they were married, were free. In fact, they were expected because it was a sign of manliness. And so if a man was not unfaithful to his wife, they thought there was something wrong. But he would begin to look for younger women, right? So women who were not married yet, young women who were free, if you will, to be engaged. And so men would do that. it's not necessarily polygamy, but it's, I don't know what the right word is. Anyways, it's being able to not be faithful to one's wife. So that was expected of men. Now, women, on the other hand, were expected to be faithful. They were expected to be heroic in their virtue. They were expected to be great teachers and great, strong leaders for the children and for the home. These were expectations of the women. Now, I know you're saying, well, that's not really fair. But that was the Roman culture. Now, there was another group that was part of the Roman culture. One of the names that they would go by is the Stoics. And so the philosophical group, the Stoics would say that the model should be for any culture is that nobody is seeking pleasure or physical or carnal pleasure. Nobody's getting married. Nobody's doing anything that would result in just physical pleasure, because they saw physical pleasure as degrading, as lowering the person, that we are called for something more. And so they expected people to work hard at virtue. And virtue comes from discipline, not from seeking pleasure. Pleasure lowers us. We become like animals, right? So that's the Stoics. Now, Christianity comes on the scene. Now, if you ever get the idea that Christianity came into the Roman Empire quietly, dispel that. The Christians never came into anything quietly, because we have a very clear sense of something that we can offer that is transformative. Okay? So the Christians come into the Roman Empire with something brand new. It's something that, yes, in our nature we know, but by divine revelation, it just becomes that much clearer. Okay? So, and I want to bring up, in the gospel of Mass of Midnight for Christmas, it begins with the Roman emperor, right? Caesar Augustus. The gospel begins with Caesar Augustus. Why did it begin with the Roman emperor, when the Roman emperor was seen as not being sympathetic, not even part of the story of Jesus? But that's because that's how Christians did it. When we came on the scene, we would immediately say, we have a new king. We have a new king, and this is a God king. Now, Caesar would say that he was God and king. And Christians would come on the scene and unabashedly say, you are not God and king. You might be an earthly king, but you are not God and king. We have one God and king. That's another reason why in the gospel you have this image of this army of angels that are coming to declare Jesus Christ as this God King. Now, when the Romans begin to hear this message, this Christian message, this good news, that they have a king and he is the true God King, you can sense right away that they are going to become hostile. But the message is more than that. It's not just one of power. It's a message of relationship. And so Christians come on the scene and they say, hey, men and women, you are both equally called to be faithful. And you're not called to be faithful just because of discipline or virtue. You're called to be faithful because you share in a relationship with the one God who continues to allow you to participate in the very creative act. That God created the world out of love, and he now gives you, as mom and dad, the ability to continue that creative act out of love. And just as God has remained faithful to us, and everything he does for us, God expects of the man and the woman to do the same. And so whereas the Roman culture may have been closer to that with women, they were way off the mark on men. And so this becomes intrinsically challenging then towards the culture. That we go in, we don't say, okay, we're just going to blend in. No. There's something about the Roman culture that is deceitful to our humanity and to what God created us for. And you see all of that right here. Just going to give an example or two. Those of you who've been part of my parish where I've been, I use this homily. The first Christmas that I'm in any parish, I'm going to use this story, and because I think they're just so powerful. So the first is, in 2008, I was assigned to Chehalis for my first assignment as a priest, and that was a year that we had the massive flooding down in Chehalis. Out in the foothills near PL and Francis, they got close to 20 inches of rain within, I think it was like a day, maybe it was 2 days, but it was a very short period of time. And all that water comes pouring down out of the foothills and just floods the Chehalis Valley, and hence we had flooding. You might remember seeing newspaper articles and pictures of somebody kayaking over Interstate 5 because it was completely submerged. So we spent about 6 months when I was there really just helping people. We turned the whole floor of our office into like a clothing bank. So I wasn't the pastor at the time, so the pastors just started orchestrating these things. And I was just like a worker bee. I just helped out, and we were helping parishioners and other people rebuild their homes because you had to tear out all the drywall because their homes got flooded and all these things. So we were really busy those 6 months. About a month and a half after the flooding, I don't remember exactly the day that it happened, but it was a little bit after. It was Christmas Eve. And so I was in the rectory, and I was kind of excited that day because I had the whole day to prepare for the evening masses, and I was getting ready to prepare my homily. And then right as I was sitting down in the chapel to just kind of hunker down just to pray and to come up with my homily, the doorbell rang. And when the doorbell rings in the rectory, it usually means there's an emergency. So I was like, oh no, this is not the time for an emergency, right? Because I need my homily. So I go answer the door. There's a young man there, and he's holding a baby. And the young man says, we've been in the motel because their home was ruined, and so their home was being fixed. They're in the motel. They don't have a place to go because the motel would only give them discounted rates for a certain period of time. But we had some vouchers, and so we could give them a voucher. The problem was that day on Christmas Eve, the office was closed. I didn't know where they kept them. And so I was like, sorry, I can't help you. And so he's saying, but we're getting kicked out today. We can't stay in the motel. We have no place to go. And I was like, come back 2 days. 2 days, we can help you out. But there's nothing I can do. Now, in my mind, you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, I just need to get back to my homily, right? So I say, you know what? I got my trusty little notepad that I always use for my homily. So I say, write your name and phone number down, and I can get back to you, okay? I'll get back to you when I can help you. So he writes his name and phone number down. I go back into the chapel. So he leaves. I go back into my chapel. I sit down, and I look at his name. And it's Jose. Jose, in Spanish, is just Joseph, right? And I'm thinking, wait a minute. It's Christmas Eve. Joseph just came to my door with a little baby. And he has no place to stay for him, his wife, and his baby. There's no room at the inn. And what did I tell him? Just like Posadas, right? I told him, sorry, I can't help you. And my first thought was, I am going to go to hell. I just turned him away. I just turned Joseph away on Christmas Eve. So I've never run so fast in all my life. I ran back. I tracked down Joseph, Jose, and made sure that they had a place to stay, just so I wouldn't go to hell, right? The thing was, I needed to receive before I could give. I wanted to give something in my homily, but I was not ready to give because I hadn't received. So Joseph, even though he may not have realized it, God wanted to use Joseph in order to help me receive something. And that is that my homily is not an opportunity for me to become narcissistic and just think of myself. So God wanted me to be humbled, to first receive before I give. That's just intrinsic. We must be transformed before we can expect our world to be transformed. If we go out into our world and we proclaim the good news and we expect the world to be transformed, and it's not, it usually means because we have not ourselves been transformed. You see, when we go out into the world, we have to first be the light if we want to shine in the darkness. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So one other story, I've used this again in my homily several times. I think it's just a powerful story. This is an example of someone who got it. This was an example of someone who went through something very painful. And in the midst of that, they received, and then they were able to give. They were able to bear witness. They were able to be a light. So this is a story. It is based on a book written by a gentleman who was a doctor in Japan. He was a radiologist during the time of World War II. The book is called The Song of Nagasaki. Okay? Nagasaki. I have a hard time pronouncing that word. The Song of Nagasaki. Okay? So, just to give you a little frame of reference, if you were to go back a number of hundreds of years into Japan, there was a time when some Catholic missionaries went into Japan, and they created some very small Catholic communities. But Japan reacted to it the same way the Roman Empire did. They made martyrs, okay? So in the Roman Empire, they made martyrs. In Japan, they made some martyrs. But they officially expelled all the Catholics as best as they could. For 200 years, the little Catholic community in Japan went without any contact from the outside world. No missionaries, nothing. And for 200 years, they survived. They obviously, they didn't have priests, so they didn't have the sacraments, but they clung to the things and they taught them from generation to generation. It's just phenomenal when you think about it, that they survived for 200 years without any outside support. Eventually, the missionaries were allowed back in 200 years later. And these little Catholic communities began to flourish again. One of these Catholic communities is in a little area right outside Nagasaki. This doctor was part of that Catholic community. He was a convert. And again, just doing what good Catholics try to do, just trying to be a good witness. August 9th is a day that the United States dropped the second atomic bomb on Japan. Now, this author gives a little explanation, a little background to that. So, apparently the plane, as it was flying over, had a first target. A first choice target, and it wasn't Nagasaki. It was another area. I think, and I don't remember exactly, it was cloud cover or something, right? So they decided to opt for their second target, which was Nagasaki. As they're flying over, they start having problems with the bomb doors. There's some little malfunction, there's something not quite right. They finally get it open, and they're a little ways past their target, so they just decide to drop the bomb. It wasn't planned that way, but they decided to do that. Well, it is dead center, ground zero, over this little Catholic community just outside Nagasaki. It's obliterated. This doctor survives because he was at work. He was a couple miles away, and he was working. His entire family's killed, along with thousands and thousands of other people. Afterwards, he begins to reflect on it as a Catholic. And you have to remember, this is the last act of war that happens in World War II. Japan, a couple days later, surrenders. And so this is the last thing that happens during World War II. And so he's reflecting on it, this doctor's reflecting on it, and he says, you know, the reality is, this was not an accident. We, as a Catholic community, were chosen. We were chosen, in some sense, to receive the opportunity. And he would say, we were given the opportunity to receive the honor of being the lambs, the victims that brought peace back into the world. By our death, the war would end. And so he wasn't saying, why me? He was saying, what an honor. We were chosen. We were considered worthy enough to be slain like the Lamb of God in order to bring peace back into the world, in order to bring light back into the world. And so just like Jesus, there's a moment to receive, but then there's a moment to give, and to give everything. And this doctor understood that they were being chosen to give everything in order to end the war, in order to bring peace back into the world. August 9th was the day. Their Catholic church was completely demolished, but the one thing they salvaged from the Catholic church was the bell. Seems like church bells can survive just about anything, including atomic bombs. And the first time they re-rang their church bell was on Christmas Eve night. And so they once again began, as a little Catholic community, in those who survived, to once again continue to be a light to the nations on behalf of their Savior, Jesus Christ. All right, God bless.